At 3 in the morning, Evelyn Brooks woke to a smell she hadn't sensed in years, an acrid, metallic sting that didn't belong inside her quiet Madeira farmhouse. For a moment she lay still, disoriented, her 63-year-old body stiff from another night of restless sleep. Then she saw it, a thin gray line drifting under her bedroom door, curling like a warning finger. Smoke. Her heart jolted. She pushed herself out of bed, feet hitting the cold wooden floor as instinct carried her down the hallway. The moment she opened the door to the kitchen, the world changed. A wall of thick, black smoke rolled toward her, swallowing the familiar counters and cabinets. Somewhere deeper in the house wood cracked, a sharp, violent sound she recognized instantly. Fire. She grabbed a towel from the sink, pressed it over her mouth, and stumbled backward, coughing hard enough to tear her throat. Flames flickered from the doorway leading to the barn, bright and alive, already climbing the beams. One spark, maybe a faulty wire they'd been meaning to replace for months. That was all it took. And now it was too late to stop anything. The heat surged with terrifying speed. 40 years of work, savings, memories, sacrifices, gone in minutes. She tried to reach the back door, but another blast of heat forced her to retreat. Her lungs burned. Her eyes streamed. She had no choice. She ran out the front door barefoot, nightgown clinging to her skin, and felt the cold November air slam into her like a slap. Outside, the sky glowed orange behind her, illuminating the familiar silhouettes of the barn, the pasture, the fence her late husband had built by hand. She stood in the gravel driveway trembling, watching as the flames leapt from the barn to the roof of the house, consuming everything she had fought to protect. The fire engine sirens were distant, too distant to save anything. She wanted to scream, but all she felt was a hollow collapse in her chest, the kind of emptiness that comes only when the last piece holding a life together finally gives out. Hours later, when the flames were reduced to smoldering ash and the fire crew gave her the quiet, apologetic nod that meant there would be no salvageable miracle, Evelyn realized she had nowhere to go. No clothes, no money, no home. Her insurance, which she had struggled to maintain through a hard year, was only partial. She had let the full policy lapse months ago when the costs became too high. One bad harvest, one broken tractor, and everything had started slipping. Now she'd slipped completely. Rain began to fall, light at first, then steady. It soaked her thin nightgown until it clung to her skin. The cold pushed into her bones, but she forced her legs to move. In the dim morning light, she walked toward the main road, shivering as the rain blurred everything into gray. There was only one place she could go. One person who should have opened her door without question. Her daughter. By the time Evelyn reached Los Altos Hills, after 2 buses and a long, shaky walk through manicured streets, lined with gates and curated gardens, the rain was falling harder. The houses here weren't just homes. They were declarations of wealth, privacy, and belonging. Everything Evelyn didn't have. Sophia's mansion stood at the end of a cul-de-sac. All white stone and oversized windows, the kind of place that looked designed to impress, not to live in. Evelyn hesitated only a second before ringing the doorbell, water sliding down her arms. The door opened just enough for Daniel Turner to appear, dressed in a fitted sweater, holding a mug of coffee. His eyes skimmed her from drenched hair to mud-streaked feet. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, disbelief curdling into disdain. "You look like someone who doesn't have a home." Evelyn swallowed hard. Her voice felt raw. "There was a fire. I lost everything. I just need—" Daniel cut her off with a short, humorless laugh. "This is a luxury neighborhood. We can't have someone showing up like this. Daniel, please. I need to see Sophia." His jaw tightened, annoyed. He turned his head and called into the house, "Sophia! Your mother's here." Sophia appeared behind him. perfectly put together in a silk robe, hair brushed and shining. Her eyes landed on Evelyn, widened, then narrowed. "Mom, what happened to you?" "You're filthy. There was a fire." "My home is gone," Evelyn whispered. "I just need somewhere to stay tonight." Sophia exchanged a quick look with Daniel, one filled with calculation, not concern. "You can't stay here," she said finally, crossing her arms. The neighbors, they'd ask questions. Evelyn felt the words like blows. "I'm your mother." "And this is an exclusive area," Daniel added, stepping forward to block more of the doorway. "People don't bring situations like this here." The rain hit harder, cold and relentless. "Please," Evelyn murmured. "Just a warm place. Just tonight." Sophia's face hardened. "No," and then, with a quiet finality sharper than any scream, Daniel pushed the door shut. It closed inches from Evelyn's face, cutting off the warm light inside, leaving her alone on the doorstep as the rain poured down and humiliation settled heavy on her shoulders. She stood there until the cold forced her to move, each step heavier than the last, wondering how her own child could look at her and see a burden instead of a mother. Evelyn walked without direction, the rain following her like a shadow that refused to lift. The streets of Los Altos Hills blurred behind her as she made her way toward the nearest bus stop, her mind numb, her clothes still clinging to her skin. Humiliation had a weight to it, a heaviness that settled in her chest, pressing with every breath. She kept replaying the image of Sophia's face, polished, distant, unmoved. A daughter who saw her own mother as an inconvenience. When she reached the covered bench by the road, she sat down with a shudder, wrapping her arms around herself for warmth she couldn't find. She had nothing left, not even a plan. She tried to focus, to breathe, to think past the sharp ache in her ribs. The fire had taken her home, but what her daughter had done felt far worse. Losing a house hurt. Losing the person you raised hurt in a way she wasn't prepared for. Her hands trembled as she reached into her soaked wallet, searching for something, anything that might ground her. Receipts, an expired library card, a folded photo of her late husband, and then, caught between two worn medical bills, she found it, a faded business card, the ink smudged from years of being pressed against other papers. Mick, Rivera Holdings Group, CEO. For a moment, she simply stared at the card, water droplets sliding off its edges. She had kept it not out of expectation, but out of love, like a small, private reminder of a decade she could never forget. Mick, the boy who had arrived at her farmhouse at 8 years old, brought by a social worker with tired eyes and a clipboard filled with reports no child should ever generate. He had been thin, pale, and quiet, carrying a garbage bag of clothes instead of a suitcase. His eyes were dark and hollow, tracking every movement like someone who expected to be sent away again at any moment. "He's been moved 3 times already," the social worker had explained. "We're hoping, well, just a few weeks until we find a permanent placement." But those weeks had turned into months, months into years. And slowly, carefully, that frightened boy learned how to sleep through the night again. He learned how to help mend fences, how to feed the chickens, how to laugh at the goats when they chewed on the laundry line. He learned that a home didn't have to be temporary. Evelyn remembered how he used to watch her cook dinner, leaning on the counter with wide eyes as if he still didn't believe he was allowed to eat at the same table every night. She remembered the first time he ran into her arms after a nightmare, the way he whispered, "Do I get to stay?" For 10 years, she had loved him like her own. And Sophia, young, jealous, territorial, had never forgiven that. She resented every kindness Evelyn offered Mick, resented the attention, resented his brilliance. They were nearly the same age, but they had lived in 2 different worlds under the same roof. And then Mick grew up. He became the brightest student at his high school, earning grades that stunned every teacher and catching the eye of scholarship committees across California. At 18, he received a full ride to a prestigious university. The day he left, he hugged her with a conviction most adults never manage. Someday, he told her, voice steady and warm, I'll take care of you the way you took care of me. I promise. She remembered that promise now. Sitting alone at a bus stop in the rain, 10 years after the last time she saw him. Would he even remember her? Would he answer? Would he care? Her fingers shook as she dialed the number on the card. The call rang once, twice. Then a voice, deeper, older, but unmistakable, came through. This is Mick Rivera. Evelyn couldn't speak. Her throat closed. Her breath trembled. Mama, he said softly, the word slipping out before he could stop it. Mom, is that you? She exhaled shakily, barely able to whisper. Mick? He didn't let her finish. Where are you? He demanded, urgency sharpening his tone. I'm coming. Right now. And for the first time that night, Evelyn felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time the rhythmic thumping of blades began to pulse through the quiet air above Los Altos hills. It started faint, almost like distant thunder, then grew louder, sharper, unmistakable. Residents on the cul-de-sac stepped onto their balconies and porches, shielding their eyes as a sleek black helicopter cut through the sky, descending lower and lower toward the pristine, carefully manicured street. Helicopters weren't unheard of in this wealthy neighborhood, but this one was different. It wasn't a medical emergency or a traffic report chopper. Its silhouette was too polished, too private, too intentional, and it was landing right in front of Sophia and Daniel Turner's mansion. Dust swirled, trellises shook, decorative lights flickered under the rush of wind. One neighbor grabbed her phone, already filming. Another stood frozen, clutching a designer robe around herself, mouth open. Evelyn Brooks watched from the sidewalk, her hair plastered to her face, her arms wrapped around her thin frame. She hadn't expected this, not this dramatic, thundering answer to a phone call made from a rain-soaked bus stop. She didn't know what Mick had become, not fully, but she felt it now, vibrating through the ground beneath her heels. The helicopter settled, its landing skids touching the asphalt with a soft bounce. The side door opened with mechanical precision, and he stepped out. Mick Rivera, no longer the thin, wary boy she once held after nightmares, emerged with the quiet confidence of a man who built empires. He wore a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, his dark hair swept back, his expression composed and unreadable. Not cold, not angry, focused. He scanned the street once, assessing the scene in a single glance, then moved directly toward Evelyn. The moment he reached her, the facade slipped. His eyes softened just for her. Without hesitating, he removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders, pulling the heavy, warm fabric close around her trembling body. Mom, he said, voice low but fierce with concern. You're freezing. The word, Mom, echoed across the cul-de-sac. A few neighbors stopped, whispering long enough to stare. The front door of the Turner mansion flew open. Daniel appeared first, adjusting his sweater as if preparing for a photo rather than a reckoning. His eyes darted between Evelyn and the helicopter, trying to appear composed but failing. Sophia followed a moment later, her robe tied hastily, makeup half finished. And Mick, she stammered, forcing a smile. We didn't expect. Goodness, is everything okay? Her voice attempted warmth, but the strain around her eyes gave her away. Mick turned toward them, slowly. The shift in his expression subtle, but unmistakable. Whatever softness he held for Evelyn vanished, replaced by a coolness sharp enough to cut glass. Hello, sister, he said. The words landed like a slap. Not affectionate, not playful, not even neutral. A declaration. Sophia's smile faltered. Daniel's face drained of color. Wait, you two know each other? Mick's eyebrow lifted, unimpressed. I lived in this woman's home for 10 years. Your wife knows me very well. Sophia swallowed hard, eyes flicking nervously to the neighbors, who were openly watching now. We were just concerned, she said quickly. Mom showed up so suddenly. We didn't know what was happening. Mick looked directly at her. You shut the door on her. The silence that followed was brutal. Daniel opened his mouth to interject, but Mick continued before he could get a word out. You know, he said lightly, almost conversationally, it's interesting. This street, these houses, this neighborhood. He gestured vaguely, his gaze landing on the Turner mansion. Rivera Holdings Group financed most of the mortgages here. Daniel blinked. Rivera what? I own the bank that holds your mortgage, Mick clarified, his tone polite in a way that made the meaning infinitely more dangerous. A tremor ran through Daniel's jaw. Sophia's breath visibly hitched. Mick stepped slightly forward, positioning himself just enough to shield Evelyn from the wind. You'll be receiving an important letter in the morning, he added calmly. Be sure not to ignore it. There was no anger in his voice, no raised volume, just certainty, final and immovable. And in that moment, watching her daughter and son-in-law crumble under the weight of a truth they hadn't anticipated, Evelyn felt the faint stirrings of something she hadn't felt all night. Vindication, not revenge, not yet, just the quiet, electric sense that the balance of the world had shifted, and not in Sophia's favor. The drive from Los Altos Hills to Atherton was quiet, the nighttime drizzle blurring the world beyond the car windows. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in Mick's coat, still shivering despite the heater humming steadily. She felt disoriented, like she had slipped into someone else's reality. Hours ago, she had stood in front of her burning farmhouse with nothing but the smell of smoke clinging to her skin. Now she was being driven to one of the wealthiest zip codes in America by the boy she once tucked into bed. When the gates of Mick's estate opened, Evelyn couldn't stop the soft gasp that left her lips. The driveway curved through towering redwoods and lantern-lit paths, leading toward a house made of glass, cedar, and warm stone. It didn't look cold or ostentatious the way she expected from the super-rich. Instead, it felt lived in, intentional, designed by someone who valued quiet comfort as much as elegance. Mick parked near the entrance and stepped out first, then helped her out gently, as though she might break. "Let's get you warm," he murmured, his voice steady despite the tension still simmering under it. Inside, soft golden lights illuminated a foyer filled with warm wood and clean lines. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something floral. Evelyn noticed how every detail, the photographs along the hallway, the cozy sectional sofa, the handmade quilts folded neatly on a chair, felt like the opposite of the cold, curated perfection in Sophia's mansion. This house felt like a home. Mick guided her to the living room and handed her a blanket. "See, I'll get you tea." She watched him move through the space with ease, no hesitation, no stiffness. He wasn't performing. He was simply being who he had grown into. And it struck her, with a sudden wave of emotion, that she hadn't been there to witness that transformation. Life had pulled them apart, but somehow the thread between them had held. When he returned, she wrapped her hands around the steaming mug and finally allowed herself to breathe deeply. Her body ached. Her heart ached even more. "Thank you," she whispered. "You never have to thank me," he said quietly, sitting across from her. "Not after everything you did for me." His voice carried a weight she had felt earlier at the cul-de-sac, but now it softened, threaded with the boy she remembered. After a moment, he stood. "Come with me. There's something I want you to see." She followed him down a hallway into a spacious office with a wall of windows opening to a view of the dark redwood grove outside. On the desk, illuminated by a single lamp, was a framed photograph. Evelyn stopped in her tracks. It was the picture taken the day his adoption papers were finalized. Not legally binding, but emotionally undeniable. Mick had insisted on the photo, standing proudly beside her with his arm wrapped around her waist, grinning with a joy few foster kids ever tasted. Evelyn remembered that day as one of the happiest of her life. "You kept this," she murmured, her throat tightening. "I keep all of them," Mick replied. "They remind me who I became because of you." He walked around the desk and leaned against it, folding his arms. His expression shifted, still warm, but layered with something more serious. "There's something else you need to know," he said. "Over the years, I've kept an eye on things. Your bills, your farm, the repairs you struggled with." Evelyn looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I've been paying some of the invoices," he admitted gently. "Quietly, anonymously. You never asked, but I knew you needed help. And I owed you so much more than a phone call once a year." Her eyes filled, emotion prickling behind them. She remembered the unexpected moments when a bill seemed lower than it should have been, or an overdue notice was mysteriously cleared. She had chalked it up to clerical errors or small blessings, but it had been him. "And that's not all," Mick continued. The warmth in his expression thinned, replaced by a sharper, more controlled intensity. "I've also been looking into Sophia and Daniel for quite some time." Evelyn's breath caught. "Why?" "Because something never sat right," he said. "And it turns out I was right." He held her gaze steadily, letting her feel the gravity of what was coming next. "That fire may have destroyed your home," he said softly, "but Sophia and Daniel destroyed far more long before tonight." Mick crossed the room to a locked cabinet built seamlessly into the wall, pressed his thumb against a small sensor, and pulled out a slim black folder. Evelyn watched him with growing unease, an unease that deepened when he placed the folder gently on the desk between them. "Before we go any further," he said, "I need you to see the truth for yourself." Evelyn hesitated before opening it. Her hands trembled, not from the cold this time, but from the sense that whatever lay inside would change the way she saw her daughter and her life forever. Inside were pages of invoices, spreadsheets, photos, and statements. Organized, precise, undeniable. Mick stepped beside her, pointing to the first document. "These are contractor invoices Daniel submitted for repairs on your barn and fencing over the past 8 years. Evelyn frowned. "I only authorized a few minor fixes. Nothing like this." "That's the problem," Mick said. "He billed you for work he never completed. Sometimes for projects he invented entirely." Her stomach tightened as she scanned the numbers. $12,000 for replacing water lines? That never happened. Neither did the roof reinforcement, the electrical rewiring, or the soil testing, Mick added. "I checked. I sent investigators to your property while you were still living there." He flipped to another section, insurance claims. Evelyn felt her heart sink as she read words she barely understood. Policy manipulation, unauthorized adjustments, falsified risk reports. Mick explained each one with calm, quiet clarity. "Daniel rerouted your insurance premiums," Mick said. "He changed your policy to a cheaper, incomplete plan. You thought you were paying for full coverage. You weren't." Evelyn pressed a hand to her lips. "But I paid every month. I struggled to keep up." "I know," Mick said gently, "but the payments weren't going where you thought." He pocketed the difference. Next came evidence of kickbacks, money Daniel received from contractors for referring jobs that never took place. The contractors in turn inflated their fake invoices, splitting the profits with him. A cold wave rolled through her. All this time he was stealing from me, while I was wondering why the bills kept getting higher. "Mick naidid, outayit." This wasn't a mistake. This was calculated. For years. He moved to the next set of documents, bank statements tied directly to Sophia. These purchases were made within days of the fraudulent withdrawals from your accounts. He pointed to a line of transactions: a jewelry store in San Francisco, high-end boutiques in Palo Alto, luxury spa packages, an invoice for a 2-week European trip. Evelyn stared. She told me Daniel paid for that trip. She said it was his bonus. Mick shook his head. He didn't have a bonus. He had your money. Her knees felt weak. She sat down, gripping the edge of the desk. My God! All those times I told her I couldn't afford repairs, couldn't afford insurance, couldn't afford to fix the fence. She knew. She knew what was happening. And she benefited, Mick said quietly. She didn't stop him because she didn't want the money to stop. Evelyn closed her eyes, fighting back the rising ache in her chest. Betrayal had a taste, bitter, metallic, and impossible to swallow. Mick continued, voice steady but with an edge of steel. I started seeing suspicious activity about 6 months ago, and when I dug deeper, I realized Daniel had taken out high-risk loans he couldn't repay. Loans tied to their house. Evelyn's eyes widened. But that's their mortgage. No, mi corrected. It's my mortgage now. She looked up sharply. I bought it, he explained, 3 months ago, quietly, when their financial behavior didn't add up. I wanted to understand why they were draining money so fast. He flipped one last page, showing the total, $152,437.61. That's what they took from you, directly. And that amount doesn't include the damage caused because you couldn't maintain full insurance coverage. A long, crushing silence filled the room. Evelyn finally whispered, The fire. I lost everything. But I could have rebuilt. I could have saved something, if they hadn't bled me dry. Mick placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. They didn't just take your money. They took your safety, your home, your stability, and they left you with nothing when you needed help the most. Her eyes stung, but she didn't cry. Not this time. The devastation of the fire had taken her home. But this betrayal, it burned even deeper. Late the next morning, while the fog still clung low over the Atherton property, Mick's phone buzzed with a series of rapid, urgent calls. He ignored the first 2, and the third, but when the fourth came in, same caller, same desperation, he finally exhaled sharply and answered. Sophia's voice burst through the line before he could speak. Meek. Please, we need to talk, she said, breathless, frantic. Something happened last night. The neighbors are asking questions. They saw the helicopter. Everyone saw it, and now they're talking about us, and Daniel is panicking, and... Mick leaned against the kitchen counter, jaw tightening. Slow down. You don't understand, she insisted. People think something is wrong with our finances. They're saying things about Daniel's job, about the mortgage. About, she stopped abruptly, as if the word itself was too dangerous to say. Mick didn't help her. He let the silence stretch. Finally, she whispered, We need to meet. Please, today. Her voice cracked, not with remorse, but with fear of consequences. Mick answered calmly, If there's going to be a meeting, Evelyn comes with me. The pause on the other end was sharp and telling. Why? Sophia asked quietly, the fragile veneer of control slipping. Can't we talk alone? No, he said. If this conversation is going to happen at all, my mother is present. The word mother landed like a stone thrown through glass. Sophia inhaled sharply, but she didn't argue. Not this time. Oh, okay, she said. Come this afternoon. Mick ended the call without responding. Evelyn had been standing near the doorway, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She didn't need to ask who it was. The tension on Mick's face told her everything. Sophia, she asked softly. He nodded. She wants a meeting. She's scared, but she doesn't want to admit why. Evelyn lowered her gaze to the steam rising from her cup. Fear, resentment, hurt. Everything inside her churned quietly. For years she had avoided conflict, convincing herself that silence was a form of peace. But peace had never come. Only distance. Only wounds that deepened in the dark. After a long moment, she set the cup down. "I'll go," she said. Mick looked at her carefully, as if gauging her strength. "You don't have to. I can handle this." "I know you can," she said with a faint, sad smile. "But I'm not hiding anymore. Not from her. Not from what she's done." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't break. It carried a steadiness she hadn't felt in years, maybe decades. She walked to the window and stared out at the redwoods, swaying gently in the morning breeze. The weight of humiliation from the night before still clung to her. But something else rose beneath it, resolve. She had been turned away like an inconvenience, dismissed like a stray dog, and left to stand in the rain with her dignity soaking into the pavement. She wasn't going to carry that shame into another day. "Tell her we'll be there," Evelyn said finally. Mick nodded, a quiet pride flickering behind his eyes. "I already did." Evelyn inhaled deeply, bracing herself not for a fight, but for the truth. After everything, years of silence, unspoken wounds, and last night's rejection, she was finally ready. Ready to face her daughter. Ready to speak what should have been spoken long ago. Ready to stop shrinking. The confrontation was coming, and this time she would not stand alone. Evelyn and Mick arrived at the Turner residence just past noon. The sky had cleared, leaving the neighborhood bathed in a crisp, polished brightness, the kind of stillness that made every sound, every movement feel magnified. It was the kind of day Los Altos Hills residents cherished. Yet behind the manicured hedges and glass-paneled homes, tension pulsed like an electric current. When they stepped onto the wide stone porch, the door opened almost instantly. Sophia stood there, her posture stiff, a smile pulled too tightly across her face. "Mom, Meek, please come in," she said, her tone warm only on the surface. Daniel hovered behind her, his expression wavering between forced politeness and barely concealed anxiety. "Hey, Evelyn," he said with a strained chuckle. "Rough night." "Huh." Evelyn didn't respond. She stepped inside, the air of the house colder than she remembered. The Turner home felt curated, like a showroom, clean surfaces, symmetrical decor. Everything chosen for appearance rather than sentiment. Sophia clasped her hands together. "Let's sit in the living room. We can talk calmly." "Okay." But once they entered the room, Mick didn't sit. Instead, he pulled his phone from his jacket and held it up. "Before we begin," he said clearly, "I want you to know that I am recording this conversation. California requires two-party consent, and I'm stating it plainly." Sophia flinched. Daniel swallowed hard, but neither objected. "Fine," Sophia muttered, sinking onto the couch. Mick remained standing. "Good. Then, let's get to the point." He placed a thick folder, the same one he had shown Evelyn, on the marble coffee table. The sound echoed in the silent room. "These documents," he said, "detail 8 years of financial fraud committed against Evelyn Brooks." Sophia's face paled. Daniel stiffened. "Okay, let's not jump to conclusions," he began. Mick cut him off sharply. "I don't jump, Daniel. I research." He opened the folder and spread several pages across the table. Invoices, bank statements, insurance reports. Evelyn watched her daughter's expression. At first denial, then panic, and finally something colder, self-preservation. Mick pointed to the inflated contractor invoices, payments for repairs that never occurred, tens of thousands of dollars stolen. Next, he flipped to the insurance documents. Unauthorized policy changes. Evelyn believed she was paying for full coverage. You rerouted premiums and pocketed the difference. Daniel opened his mouth again, but Mick's voice sliced through the air. "Don't. Every number has been verified." Then came the receipts tied to Sophia. Jewelry, designer boutiques, a luxury European trip. Sophia's voice trembled. "Daniel told me. He said it was his bonus." "That's a lie," Mick replied calmly. "And you knew it." Silence pressed down on the room, thick and suffocating. Finally, Evelyn spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You stood in your doorway," she said, turning toward Sophia, "and you looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was dirt on your shoes." Her hand trembled, but she didn't look away. "I came to you with nothing, with ashes on my clothes, and you shut the door." Sophia's eyes widened, filling with something between shock and shame. "Mom, I didn't know." "Yes, you did," Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength. "You always knew what he was doing. You benefited from it. You watched me struggle and said nothing." Daniel stepped forward, his voice rising defensively. "Look, Evelyn, you have to understand, money was tight, and we were under a lot of pressure." "Pressure?" Mick snapped. "Stop being closer. You bled a 63-year-old woman dry. You left her without insurance, without safety, without a home." Daniel's mouth snapped shut. Mick took a breath, then spoke with unwavering calm. "Here are your options." Both Sophia and Daniel froze. "You will repay Evelyn $200,000, every dollar stolen, plus interest, or you will sign the deed to this home over to her." Sophia gasped. "What?" "You can't." "I can," Mick said. "I own your mortgage, and I will move forward with foreclosure proceedings tomorrow if you refuse." Daniel's face drained of color. "You wouldn't." "I would," Mick said flatly. Evelyn stood, her spine straighter than it had been in years. Her voice, though quiet, carried across the room with unmistakable strength. "I won't live in fear of you anymore. Not of either of you." For the first time, Sophia looked at her mother not with superiority, not with annoyance, but with something else entirely, recognition. Because Evelyn Brooks, the woman they had dismissed and exploited, now stood unbroken. And she wasn't stepping aside. Mick's ultimatum hung in the air long after he and Evelyn stepped out of the Turner house. The door shut behind them with a dull, defeated click, leaving Sophia and Daniel standing in the polished silence of their own living room, now less a sanctuary and more a trap closing in. "You gave us 24 hours, Mick had said. "Not a minute more." Those words echoed through the halls like a ticking clock. Sophia paced across the marble floor, hands gripping her hair. "What are we going to do, Daniel?" "He's serious. He owns our mortgage. He can take the house." Daniel didn't answer. He stood frozen by the window, staring out at the cul-de-sac where neighbors pretended not to stare, but their blinds shifted with the slightest movement. The helicopter from the night before had already become a neighborhood legend. By now, speculations were spreading like wildfire. "If this gets out," Sophia whispered, voice cracking, "if anyone finds out we stole from my own mother—" "We didn't steal," Daniel snapped automatically, but the protest sounded hollow even to him. Sophia glared at him. "Don't lie to me. Not now." Daniel rubbed his forehead. Fear crept into every line of his posture. "Mick can't prove everything." Sophia's voice dropped to a brittle whisper. "He already did." The house felt colder by the minute. Their once confident facade, the perfect marriage, the perfect home, the perfect life, was crumbling, replaced by panic they couldn't outrun. By the time the next morning arrived, neither of them had slept. When the doorbell rang at 9 a.m., they didn't need to guess who it was. Mick stood on the porch with a notary and a folder of documents. "This is your decision?" he asked calmly. Sophia's eyes were red, her voice barely above a whisper. "We'll sign the deed." She couldn't look at her mother, who stood behind Mick, quiet, steady, present. Daniel tried one last weak attempt. "Mick, come on. We can work something out, maybe a payment plan." "No," Mick said simply. "This is the consequence." The notary opened the folder, and the weight of reality settled over the room like dust. It took less than 15 minutes. For signatures, initials on a dozen lines, a final stamp, and the house, the centerpiece of their curated life, no longer belonged to them. It belonged to Evelyn. When the papers were gathered and the notary left, Sophia sank onto the stairs, her shoulders shaking. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't offer an apology. She simply sat there, looking at the place that was no longer hers. Mick spoke quietly. You have until tonight to gather your things. Daniel's jaw tightened with anger he didn't dare express. Where are we supposed to go? He muttered. There are rentals available in Mountain View, Mick replied evenly. Or farther south, if that's what you can afford now. He didn't say with what you have left, but the implication was clear. By evening, the Turner driveway was lined with boxes, bags, and a single borrowed pickup truck. The neighbors watched from behind hedges and half-closed blinds, pretending they weren't witnessing a fall from grace. Daniel slammed the truck door harder than necessary. His phone buzzed with new emails, notifications from HR, compliance, and internal auditing. By nightfall, he would officially lose his job. Fraud exposure wasn't something companies tolerated. Sophia placed the last bag in the truck bed, her hands trembling. She didn't look back at the house. She couldn't. They drove away as the sun dipped behind the hills, no longer residents of Los Altos Hills, no longer protected by wealth or reputation, and no longer able to pretend their lives hadn't been built on someone else's suffering. They had chosen deceit. Now they were living its consequences. Evelyn moved into the Los Altos Hills house quietly, without ceremony, without the need to justify why she belonged there. She stepped through the front door carrying nothing but a borrowed duffel bag and the clothes she'd worn the night her life burned down. Yet somehow, crossing the threshold felt less like entering someone else's home and more like reclaiming a part of herself she had lost long ago. Mick had arranged everything. A bedroom furnished with warm colors and soft linens, a fully stocked kitchen, clothes in her size neatly arranged in the closet, even a vase of garden roses on the dresser. Her favorite, though she hadn't mentioned that preference in years. For the first time since the fire, Evelyn breathed easily. The house, once built to impress, seemed different now. Softer, lived in, safe. Whether it was the memories she chose to place in its rooms, or simply the fact that she no longer had to perform gratitude for people who didn't value her. She wasn't sure, but she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Every Friday, just as the sun dipped behind the rolling hills, Mick arrived for dinner. Sometimes he brought takeout from a high-end Palo Alto restaurant. Other times he cooked with her, laughing quietly when he burned something or overseasoned a dish. They fell into a rhythm, easy, steady, familiar. The decade they'd spent apart melted into something natural, as if he'd never left the farmhouse kitchen where he learned to chop vegetables at her side. One Friday evening, he arrived earlier than usual, carrying a small, carefully wrapped box. Evelyn noticed immediately that his expression held a different kind of warmth, something almost shy. "Can we sit?" he asked. They settled at the dining table she had polished earlier that morning. He slid the box toward her, and Evelyn hesitated before unwrapping it. Inside was a delicate, handcrafted invitation mock-up, cream paper, gold lettering, a sketch of redwoods surrounding a garden arch. "What's this?" she asked softly. Mick drew a breath. "It's for my wedding." Evelyn blinked, stunned. "Your wedding?" He nodded, eyes brightening. "I asked Sarah Coleman to marry me. She said yes." Her heart swelled, not with loss, not with surprise, but with a quiet joy. "Oh, Mick!" "She wants you to help plan it," he added quickly. "We both do." Evelyn traced the edge of the card, emotions tightening her throat. She remembered Sarah, the soft-spoken architect who had come by the estate a few times, offering designs for renovations. A woman with kind eyes and an effortless warmth. Someone who saw Mick not as a CEO or a billionaire, but as a human being. "I would be honored," Evelyn whispered. Relief softened Mick's shoulders. "Good, because we're having it here." She smiled, imagining the backyard, transformed, string lights, Flowers, laughter echoing beneath the oak trees. A wedding filled with people who valued love over appearances, people who valued family over pride. Healing began to settle into Evelyn's bones, quietly reshaping the spaces once filled with grief. She cooked, she gardened, she read books by the window. She laughed more. She slept through the night. She no longer walked on eggshells to preserve a connection with people who treated her like an obligation. A few times, she heard bits of news about Sophia. A neighbor mentioned she had taken a job as a receptionist at a medical office. Another said she and Daniel were living in a modest apartment in Mountain View. There were whispers of financial strain, marital arguments, even talks of downsizing further. But Evelyn didn't feel compelled to reach out. She felt nothing. The guilt that had once gnawed at her was gone. The instinct to protect, to smooth over, to forgive preemptively gone too. Evelyn had spent a lifetime giving to a daughter who had only taken. Now, with the quiet of the hills settling around her, she finally understood. Love was not measured by blood. It was measured by presence, kindness, and choice. And Mick, her boy, now a man, chose her every week without failing. Evelyn chose him too, without guilt, without hesitation, without looking back. Spring arrived gently in Los Altos Hills, softening the air and coaxing life back into the garden behind Evelyn's home. A month earlier, that garden had been little more than an overgrown stretch of grass and neglected beds. But with careful pruning, new soil, and the steady rhythm of Evelyn's hands, it transformed into something warm and welcoming, an intimate sanctuary surrounded by blooming roses, climbing vines, and the shade of tall oaks. It was the perfect place for a wedding. Sarah Coleman thought, so the moment she saw it. "It feels like a place where something new can begin," she had said during her first walk-through. And Evelyn, hearing that, had nodded with quiet pride. The garden reflected the same truth she carried inside herself. So together, Evelyn and Sarah planned every detail. They spent afternoons at the dining table with swatches of fabric, floral catalogs, and hand-drawn sketches. They chose soft colors, sage, ivory, rose gold. They built a wooden arch lined with eucalyptus and white blossoms. They arranged small tables draped with linen, each centerpiece a simple bouquet grown from Evelyn's own soil. Mick stepped back and let them take the lead, though he often watched with a smile that made Evelyn's heart tighten with affection. Seeing her so involved, so alive, seemed to fill him with a sense of peace he didn't try to hide. When the wedding day arrived, sunlight filtered through the branches, scattering gold across the grass. Guests began to fill the garden. Close friends, colleagues who felt like family, people who had supported Mick and Sarah through their hardest years. The air hummed with soft conversation and gentle music. No one judged. No one whispered. It was a gathering of genuine affection, not obligation. Evelyn stood near the arch, smoothing a small crease in the tablecloth. For a brief moment she thought she might feel sadness over Sophia's absence, but the feeling never came. Instead, she felt a deep, steady stillness. Sophia had chosen distance long before any of this happened. Today simply honored the reality Evelyn had finally accepted. Peace sometimes comes from letting go. When the ceremony began, Mick appeared at the end of the aisle, dressed in a tailored navy suit, eyes bright and steady. Sarah walked toward him through the garden path, her simple lace dress brushing the tops of the flowers. As she reached him, Evelyn felt her throat tighten with emotion, not loss but gratitude. The vows were heartfelt and intimate. Mick promised to love with honesty and patience. Sarah promised partnership, laughter, and strength. When they exchanged rings, the entire garden seemed to breathe with them, warmth rising from the earth, sunlight catching on the petals around them. As they exchanged their first kiss as husband and wife, guests applauded softly. Evelyn wiped a tear from her cheek, not of sadness, of arrival. Later, during the reception, Mick approached her with a glass of sparkling cider. The music drifted gently behind them. Sarah laughed with friends near the arch, her joy unmistakable. "You did all this," Mick said, sweeping a glance across the garden. "You made this place beautiful." Evelyn shook her head. "You and Sarah made it beautiful." "No," he replied, his voice softening. "You shaped everything good in my life. The man I became, the one she fell in love with, that's because of you." The sincerity in his eyes struck her deeper than she expected. She rested a hand over his. "You were always meant for goodness, Mick. I just gave you a place to start." They stood there for a moment, surrounded by laughter and clinking glasses and the soft hum of spring air. It felt like closure, not from pain, but from a long journey back to herself. When the last guests left and the lights dimmed, Evelyn walked slowly across the garden, taking in the quiet. She touched the edges of the arch, traced the petals that had fallen onto the grass, and for the first time in years, she felt no weight on her shoulders. She had a real son now, not by blood but by love and choice. She had a future, one that might include grandchildren's laughter echoing through this garden. She had a home, not built on judgment or fear, but on warmth and belonging. Evelyn looked up at the soft glow of the evening sky and let out a long, steady breath. Family, she realized, wasn't something you were given. It was something you chose. And sometimes choosing was stronger than blood,